Today's monthly build video is going to be a little bit different. Well, usually we have a price target in mind or are building something like a 1440p gaming machine. Today, we're going to be focusing on showing you step by step how to build what I'll call a bargain PC. Now, this doesn't mean that there aren't cheaper components out there. This also doesn't mean that there aren't better performing components out there. There are definitely both of those things. But what we'll be doing is trying to find parts that right now can be had for a bargain, meaning really good performance compared to how much you'll need to shell out for them. The build process will be a step-by-step explainer on how to take all these blue label specials and magically transform them into a functional gaming PC. Enermax's brand new Starry Ford offers maximum flexibility and sharp looks with a broad range of hardware support and a price that doesn't break the bank. With 4 pre-installed square RGB fans and an integrated 6-device addressable RGB hub, keeping control of your lighting effects has never been easier. It supports liquid cooling configurations with up to 360mm rads, and if you need even more room inside, the PSU shroud and drive cage are easily removable. Check out the link in the video description to learn more. Because the majority of our time here today is going to be focused on actual physical assembly of what you see in front of me, the rest of the video is going to be a little light on our normal monthly build series procedures. At the end of the video, I'll give you guys a quick look at performance and maybe some B-roll mixed in of our final product, but there won't be a long debriefing like we usually do. But for now, let's get up close and personal with our new bargain PC. So why don't we just start on the right, work our way left, and I guess we'll kick it off with the case. Now, the case isn't something that I've ever built with before. I actually have never even heard of this company, but I was doing research for this project, and on Newegg, this was only $40 shipped, and it seemed like a really good bargain to me. It's got some ventilation on the front and on the top. It's got a nice big side window. The I/O loadout is pretty decent, including SD card readers, which you don't see very much. It's got a fan controller here, 3 USBs, power reset. I think this is a lighting switch. One of these is a lighting switch. And the fact that it comes with 3 fans seems to be a really good deal for the money. $40 shipped for this case, and it's a decent size. Looks pretty good too. So we're gonna roll with this. We'll see how it is. Maybe building in it, I'm gonna cut my hands all up because the metal's garbage, but we'll see. Next to that, we have 3 components. Obviously, the most important part of our build is going to be the processor. This is the Ryzen 7 1700X. This is first generation Ryzen. You can still find these, and at Microcenter right now, the 1700X 8-core 16-thread chip is $130. I remember a couple years ago when you needed to spend $700 or $800 to get an 8-core chip, and now you could get one for $130. And this is still a really high-performing CPU, and one that I still recommend, especially for this price. It makes it a really good bargain. We move it to the right a little bit. We see our Hybrid 212 Black Edition cooler. You could get these for around $35. The performance of these is excellent, especially with a chip like Ryzen. Intel, like more power-hungry chip, like a 9700K, 9900K. This might not quite cut it, but with Ryzen that draws less power, produces less heat, these coolers are awesome. Next to that, we have our power supply. And to be honest, I wasn't entirely sure if I wanted to go with this or not. This might be a little underpowered, and I would probably recommend going with something like a 500 or a 550 for this kind of a build. This is what I have on hand right now, so we're going to go with this. But the EVGA power supplies in this range typically cost probably about $40 to $50. And EVGA quality is always top notch. So for 40 bucks, a 450B power supply from EVGA seems, again, like a really good bargain. If you're building along at home, maybe step it up 50 or 100 watts just to be safe. To the left of that, we have our SSD Patriot Burst 480 gigabytes. Now, this SSD was only $45, and I'm going to skip again to the left a little bit to just talk quickly about both of these. So we got the Patriot Burst SSD and the Team T-Force Vulcan DDR4 3000. This is a 2x8 gigabyte kit for 65 bucks. Price on both of these items is come way, way down. We're under 10 cents per gigabyte now for storage, And memory prices this time last year, this kind of a kit would probably cost you $150. So this is only 65 bucks. It's super low profile, still looks pretty good with the gray heat spreaders. And both of these are a really good bargain. Behind that, we have our motherboard, the Gigabyte B450M. This is probably not the best overclocking board. There are better overclocking boards, especially on the Micro ATX form factor. However, it still will support overclocking. If you want to try it, our 1700X is going to be a moderately decent overclocking chip. Not the best, but for our purposes today, this is a really solid bargain as well. This was only $68. So there are cheaper Micro ATX boards out there. I didn't want to skimp too badly, but this will certainly fit our needs. We won't be doing any overclocking today. We should not have any problem at all running our 1700X in this board. And then finally, we have our GPU. And this might surprise a lot of people. Usually on our monthly build series, we do not feature pre-owned parts, but we are this time. I figured I could break the rules at least once. This is a GeForce GTX 970. This happens to be the Strix model. There are a lot of these out there on eBay, on Craigslist, other sites, Let Go, offer up for $100, around $100, even cheaper sometimes. This is, again, absolutely an absurd bargain. The 970 is still a very functional card, especially for 1080p gaming. There's a reason why this was so popular when it was released. It is a really good, really solid investment, still running strong, still can play all of your esports titles with ease, even some AAA titles at 1080p. It's got only 4 gigs of VRAM or 3.5 or whatever you want to call it, but it still should hold up just fine in a lot of tasks. And the fact that they are so widely available right now for $100, I think that, again, this is a super solid bargain, and we're going to be building with it today and seeing how it pairs with everything else on this table. All right, so first we got to take our motherboard out of the box, and I have done that just to save us a little bit of time because we're going to prepare it outside of the case before we install everything in there. It makes it a lot easier to do out here in the open. Don't forget to take your I/O shield out of the box as well. You will need this later on during the install, and if you forget it, going back and uninstalling everything just to install this in the back of the case is a real pain. You will also need one other thing for this kind of build, and that is a SATA data cable. These come along packaged in along with the motherboard. This one, if my camera would focus, is a right angle. Usually motherboards will come with both right angle and straight. I chose the right angle one for this. It doesn't really make very much of a difference unless you have some really tight cable routing situation going on. Then we're going to need to install our processor. So Ryzen processors come in this little clamshell. When you open the clamshell, be careful that it does not come flying out because these pins down here are very delicate. You do not want to bend them. But once you get your processor out, and I'm having focus issues here. Here we go. There are your pins. Don't bend the little pins. Once you get them out, we got to get them in the socket. To install a Ryzen CPU in the AM4 socket, it is pretty easy. You take this little retention arm, you lift it up, you push it all the way back. You take the CPU, it actually installs sideways. So if you're looking at it like this, the Ryzen is going to be facing to your left. And you just drop it in, maybe wiggle it a little bit until it falls down into the socket all on its own. No pressure involved. So if you wiggle it, it shouldn't move any side to side. And then you just push the retention arm back down and clip it into place. The next thing we want to do is to take off the 2 stock AMD cooler mounting brackets. Now, some aftermarket coolers will use these brackets, so make sure that whatever cooler you have, you're reading the installation manual. I have built, I can't even count how many computers, and every time I work with a new cooler, I read the manual because every cooler is different. But the Hyper 212 Black does not use these brackets, so we have to remove them. It's as simple as undoing 4 screws and just lifting the brackets off like that. Now this kind of leads me to another kind of side point. Get yourself a nice screwdriver. Something like this. This is actually Be Quiet screwdriver, but something like this with a magnetic tip is super helpful when building PCs. These aren't all that expensive and they come in handy. But once the brackets are removed, you're going to want to lift the motherboard up and take out the mounting plate from the back. We won't be using this. What I do with these is I store them in the motherboard box until we're ready to disassemble the system, or in case we need it in the future. So our Hybrid 212 Black comes with its own mounting plate, and it has, I've done some pre-installation here of some screws, but again, read your motherboard's manual. It will tell you exactly what you need to do as far as how to put the mounting plate together, but it just reinserts back through the same 4 holes, and the way you secure it in place is with these nuts. So let me screw in my nuts and then we'll move on. The next thing to worry about is thermal paste. Now, some coolers will come with thermal paste pre-applied to the bottom of the cold plate. This one does not. A lot of like Asetek all-in-one coolers will come with that, but the ones that don't come with it pre-applied will come with it in a tube. So don't worry, you're not gonna get a cooler without any thermal paste. You don't have to buy that separately. It's something that should be included. But when you're putting the thermal paste on your CPU, squeeze it out slowly and get anywhere between a rice-sized grain and a rice-sized blob and a pea-sized blob. Using more is not necessarily going to hurt you. You're just going to end up with a mess. Using significantly less can be a problem as far as thermal conductivity, and you could spread it out all over the surface of the CPU die, the IHS, if you want to. You don't have to do that. The mounting pressure from the cooler itself will cause it to spread out and be an appropriate thickness most of the time. So I wouldn't necessarily worry about having to spread it all over the CPU. You can do that if you want. It's not going to hurt anything. Now, again, like I said, every cooler is different, but the Hybrid 212 Black has 4 screws that you have to screw into these mounting holes. And it mounts just straight down like this. And then you screw in the 4 screws at the corner, which I'm gonna do right now. So make sure that you are screwing in everything in a diagonal pattern. So if you do the back left, the next one that you want to do is the front right. And I'm trying to work around the camera here, so this is a little bit difficult. But you want to make sure that the mounting pressure is as even as possible so that you don't cause any trauma to the CPU itself, because if you mount it, it's uncommon, but it certainly does happen. If you happen to screw in, say, this side, this screw, and this screw, you could potentially have a lot of pressure on this side of the IHS and none over here, and you could potentially bend the heat spreader on the CPU. And there were some instances back when Skylake was first released, so like the 6600K, 6700K, where people were installing coolers with uneven mounting pressure, and they were bending or breaking the substrate. It was actually, the pressure was such that it caused the CPU itself, not the metal that you're looking at, not the heat spreader, but the underneath, to become damaged. So it certainly happens, fairly uncommon, but the way to avoid that is by screwing in diagonal patterns. So do the back one first, do the back left first, front right, back right, and then front left. Don't screw them all in 100% the first time around. Do them like, 70-80%, and then go back and tighten everything up. And now we have a nice, solidly installed CPU cooler tower. This cooler is a single fan design. It comes separately with these little mounting brackets on the side, and it's really easy to just clip on to the sides of the tower itself, and that's how it stays in place. But your fan installation is not done. You have to make sure that your PWM wire, or this is your fan wire, is plugged in to your motherboard, to the appropriate header on the motherboard. So this right here, this says CPU fan. This is where you want to make sure that this is plugged in. So it's as easy as lining up the pins and pushing it down into place. And then you're installed. Now you're gonna have this cable mess that you're gonna have to clean up later. We'll take care of that at the end. So you will notice that there is another cable that comes off of our fan, and that's this. This is a 4-pin 12-volt RGB cable. Now, if you don't have any RGB headers on your motherboard, there are controllers out there that will work with these kinds of connections so that you can control the lighting on here. However, our motherboard does happen to have a header. Unfortunately, it's all the way over here. Now, there are 2 different headers on this motherboard for lighting control. One of them down here is a 3-pin, and this one is a 4-pin. The 3-pin RGB headers which I'm going to zoom in on right now, are 5 volts. These are made for addressable RGBs. These are not properly powered to handle something like a 4-pin cable. The 4-pin header is over here. So just make sure that the arrow on the cable lines up with the pin that's labeled 12 volts on the pins, and then you just push it down into place. Next up is memory, and you see that the DIMM slots have different color coding. That's to make sure that when you are installing multiple memory DIMMs, that you are installing them in the right slots. So the gray slots are going to be a pair and the black slots are going to be a pair. And when you have 2 DIMMs like we do here, we have 2 sticks of this Vulcan Z DDR4. They're going to go in the gray slot. So that's the outermost slot and then the 3rd slot. In order to do that, pop these open by just pushing down on the tabs. You want to line up the notch with the notch that's in the slot. You want to put it in here, and you want to press down firmly with even pressure. And they'll snap into place. The 2 tabs on the ends will then close in and hold this where it needs to be. We do the same thing with our 2nd DIMM, which goes in the 3rd slot. And our memory is installed. Now it's time to take our case and get it ready for installation. We're going to need to take off both side panels in order to do this. This case happens to have thumb screws that hold the side panels in place. Unscrew them, pop this off, and put it somewhere safe. Same thing on the other side. We've got thumb screws on the top and on the bottom. Just undo these. Oh, that one's a little tough, okay. Pull this off and put it away somewhere. All right, so do you remember the I/O shield that we talked about earlier? Well, this is the time to install it before you put anything else in your case. So you want to take it with the orientation of the audio jacks. That's usually the round holes pointed to the right. You want to put this in from the inside of the case. You want to seat it inside the rectangular opening, and then you press from the back until you hear it click in. And of course, this is going to take me a couple tries because I'm recording it as a demo and it's just not working. And I hope you guys are enjoying this. In? Is that in? That's in? All right, we got it. Nope. There we go. Okay, so now the I/O shield, now the I/O shield is in place. So now it's going to be time to drop our motherboard into the case. You'll see that our case already has pre-installed standoffs, these little gold studs. Some cases will not have these pre-installed. Refer to your motherboard's manual as far as where they need to go to mount the size of the motherboard that you are going to be putting in the case. A lot of cases these days do come with these pre-installed, however. So because we've pre-prepared our motherboard, cooler, and memory, it's ready to just drop right in and line up with the appropriate motherboard mounts and with the I/O. You just kind of seat it in place, line it up with the motherboard mounts. There are holes through the motherboard that you'll be able to see the standoffs, and then also line it up with your I/O shield with the holes in the I/O shield in the back. You'll know that you installed your I/O shield incorrectly if the holes don't line up with the I/O that's coming out the back of the motherboard. Use the screws included with your case to secure down the motherboard to the standoffs. A lot of times cases will come with multiple different screws for mounting different things in the case. Again, refer to the manual, figure out which screws you need to use for these standoffs. You don't want to try to force the wrong screws into the standoffs. You could damage the standoffs, you could damage the motherboard itself. Next up, it's time to mount our power supply. Now you notice that the case has some slots down here along with some filtering to allow our power supply to breathe. Now there's a fan down here that's going to suck air in, cool the components of the power supply, and the only way that it can get that air is from here. So you want to make sure that the fan portion of the power supply is pointed down. So you're just going to slide this right into place, face it towards the rear, line up the mounting holes appropriately, and then screw in, again, using the screws provided by your case. Some power supplies also come with their own screws, but All these screws are pretty standardized as far as power supply mounts. But again, the case should come with screws that will allow you to do this. Next, we're going to mount our SSD, and we're going to do that into one of the hard drive trays that comes pre-installed in the case. This slides right in underneath the power supply shroud, and it can hold either 3.5 or 2.5 inch drives. If you're mounting a 2.5 inch drives, the mounting holes are different than the 3.5 inch drives, but it basically just sits like this, and you screw it in from the back. You can see that the holes line up with the mounting holes on the tray. Once we've got our SSD mounted on the sled, it just slides right back into place in the case. Now it's going to be time to start plugging some stuff in. We've got our giant mess of cables that is connected to the front panel of our case. Let me just introduce you to some of them you're going to need to know. This is a USB 3.0 header. This is still a Type A connection. This is where it goes on your motherboard. We've got two different connectors here that look very, very similar, but as you can see by their pinouts, they are different because there are different plugs that are actually blocked. So this is going to be your HD audio, and this is going to be your USB Type A, but it's USB 2.0. So this is where they go on this motherboard. And then you have your front panel connectors. So this is going to be your hard drive activity light, it's going to be your reset switch, it's going to be your power switch, and on this motherboard they go here. Now just be sure to consult your motherboard manual. It'll tell you exactly where to plug these in, and so you don't get everything all messed up. Now it's time to install our 24 pin, which is the main power for our system. It's the biggest cable that comes off of the power supply. You want to thread it through or feed it through from the back through one of the openings, and then press it firmly into place until it clicks and the clip is firmly over the little lip that's on the motherboard. You need to do the same thing with the EPS 8-pin connector, which is right back here in the corner. You're going to feed it through this opening back here and then move it down and plug it in until it clicks. The fans that come with this case are molex powered, and they come with a molex splitter with the fans already all connected up to these various plugs. So all you need to do is plug in a molex connector from your power supply to the molex splitter, and that will power all the fans in the case. Now it's time to power our SSD, and SSDs are powered by SATA connection as opposed to molex. SATA is a little bit different than molex. You can see that it is keyed here on the end. There's a little notch towards the end of the connector to make sure that you're lining everything up right. But our SSD is down here in the bottom. We line the notch up with the notch on the right side of the SSD connector, put it in place, and just press firmly. Don't wiggle it around once it's plugged in. These can break. They're not as, I guess, hardy as a molex plug, but just push it in straight and you shouldn't have any problem. Now we need to connect our SATA data cable. Now remember, this is what we pulled out of the motherboard box. This is our right angle connection. Again, this is keyed. So you see a little notch there on the end. It's going to line up with a notch on the SATA data connection on the back of the SSD so that you cannot connect it improperly. Put it in here, press it in place until it clicks, and then the other end will need to get connected to the motherboard. And the way you do that is by routing it through one of these openings, again lining up the keying with the port on the motherboard, pressing it in place until it clicks, and then tidying up the cables. Actually, you know what, I'm going to route it down here just to tidy it up, but that's how the connection is made. And lastly, we're going to install our graphics card. Now this is the PCIe power connector down here, and this is the important part. It's what interfaces with the motherboard in one of these slots that we'll show you in a little more detail in a second. But the graphics cards actually get installed like this so that the PCIe power connectors are exposed and you could easily route your wires. Now in order to attach it to the case, we do need to take off two of these expansion slot covers. And we do that back here by unscrewing this cover to give us access, hopefully. There we go. Now we have access to the expansion slot covers, and you just unscrew them to release. You will need these screws to secure your graphics card in place, so don't lose them. Oop, there goes our screwdriver. But once we do that, we can then just pop these out, put them somewhere else, and now we have our slots for our graphics card that are going to mount in there. Now this is a PCIe expansion slot. You can see that it's got two sections to it, a small section and then a longer section, and it corresponds with this. So you have a small section, focus, camera, there we go, a small section and a longer section. So we have to just flip this over, put this in, make sure that the slot aligns with the connector, and press in firmly until it clicks. In order to tighten the graphics card in place, we're going to use the same screws that came out of our expansion slot covers. You can tighten these fairly tightly, don't strip them or anything, but this is what's going to hold the GPU in place. It can help prevent sag if they're tightened down correctly, but make sure that you use both of them and just screw them in like that, and then the graphics card is installed. The last thing is to plug the power into the GPU itself. We've got our PCIe 8 pin. You see it says PCIe on it, and it is keyed. So again, you cannot plug it in incorrectly. Just line it up, push it in until it clicks, and then tidy up your cables so you don't have a mess. So everything is connected. Does it work? Let's find out. Yes, there it is. Everything's spinning up. All right guys, so we've gone way long on time for this video, so we're gonna skip over the performance metrics for this one. I know that this was a little bit different from our normal monthly build series, but I wanted to try something a little bit new, help you guys out, maybe some newer builders with a build guide. We've managed to make ourselves quite the mess on this desk, but our PC is up and running. I will be testing it. If you guys really want that performance data, let me know down below, and maybe we could do a follow-up video on this at a later time and let you know how our 970 works with a 1700X. But until then, here's some sexy B-roll, and thanks for watching, guys.